monitoring that counts.
Yeah, and they will probably do it.
It's really interesting to help us. Anecdotal, I had the same thing with Taumata. And then I can see in the motel, client help, there's more and more people coming with their own bikes, more and more people.
Yeah.
We start? Yeah. Okay. Welcome everybody. Okay, and welcome to our guests, and we're in your hands.
Kia ora, thank you very much. Can everybody hear all right?
Yes.
Excellent, great. Kia ora, everybody. My name's Tim Cadogan, engagement specialist here at the Water Services Authority, Taumata, Arowai, and joining me is Rachel East, our South Island operations manager. So she's here to answer any really technical questions you may have, thank goodness. Thank you firstly for the opportunity to speak today. I'm trying to get around all the councils at the first 6 months of the triennium just to do two things. One is to give a background on the role of the Water Services Authority, recognising there's a number of new members to the council table, and secondly to update on some recent bodies of work that we've been undertaking for those who have been here for a while, and obviously for the benefit of the new folk as well. So I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully he ambitiously says, because as he goes to do it, the screen he's looking for isn't making itself apparent, which is quite bizarre. Bear with me. That is really annoying. I'll carry on talking while I catch myself up with myself. The purpose of today's talk is to talk about the Water Services Authority. As I said, we were formed in 2016, which was the same year that I actually became Mayor of the Central Otago District, and way more importantly than that, was the year of the failings at the water treatment plant at Havelock North, where Campylobacter got into the water, and it contributed significantly to the death of 4 people, and also had several thousand getting very sick. Just bear with me. For some reason, this isn't going to work. If I disappear, I'll come back. No, that's good. I haven't disappeared. That's very frustrating. Here we are. Okay, so yeah, 2016, and that was what led Taumata Arowai to be formed back then, because we were in a situation where people had been made incredibly sick by a public water supply in New Zealand, and that was deemed as just not being acceptable. Now, you should have that screen in front of you.
We can't see anything, Tim. Sorry, we can just see the yourself, but we can't see any presentation.
Okay, that is bizarre because it is showing as
we can see it now. That's all good.
Good, excellent. That's just the distance between us. Hopefully it'll jump between screens a bit quicker. Okay, so we were set up in 2016 following that incident at Havelock North that I'm sure you're all familiar with. So our motto is safe water every day for everyone. So how are things going with that? You should see a lovely building in front of you now with mountains behind if everything's working right. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Excellent. Right, we're on track. Okay, that's a camping ground in Canterbury. Now, it wasn't on a council supply. It was treating its own water, and it catered to school children a lot. And in September 2025, an E. coli bug got into the water supply. Now, E. coli is regularly tested in both council and private water supplies in New Zealand, primarily because it is what's called an indicator species. E. coli is quite a common bug. You will have some E. coli of various forms in your intestine at the moment. It comes in many shapes and sizes, and generally it's mostly harmless. But what it does do is it's an indicator species. It tells us and water operators if there is essentially fecal matter getting into the water supply. Obviously, you don't want that, and importantly, if there's fecal matter in there and there's E. coli in there showing it, there's going to be other pathogens in there as well. Now, regrettably, at this camping ground in September this year, the E. coli that did get in was a particularly nasty form of E. coli, a Shiga E. coli, and it made a large number of children very, very sick. There were 37 probable cases of illness from this, 10 confirmed. 6 children required hospital treatment, and media reported one of those kids being in hospital for 10 days. And I'm sure you all know how sick you have to be in hospital for 10 days in this day and age. These are very, very unwell children caused by the water treatment. So there's 2 things I want you to take away from today's Cordeiro, if nothing else. And the first one is that we can't presume our water is safe in New Zealand. A lot of it is, a lot of the time, but not all of it is all of the time. It is a very risky presumption to think our water's fine. And you look in the background there and you'll see mountains. This isn't something happening in a city with an industrial complex next door to it. This is somewhere fairly, far away and remote in some regards. So yeah, I want to challenge that myth. Now you might say, okay, well that happened there and these things happen, or somebody might say to you, so every week here at Taumata, Arowai, we get reports from the labs. When tests come through to labs for E. coli, when they trigger positive responses in water supplies, we get told about it. So I checked it for last week, and there were 15 E. coli notifications across the country. 15 supplies that were found to have had, in some way, shape, or form, fecal contamination. One of them was a Ministry of Education school. 4 came from council supplies. Now, I'm not going to say who they were, but 4 came from council supplies last week, and the rest were unregistered supplies. Currently, under the law in New Zealand, you don't have to be registered. Supplies that are for 25 people or under aren't going to need to register. 25 people or over will have to register by 2028 and be fully compliant by November 2030. But at this stage, we monitor and try to help them as best we can. Taking you back to Havelock North, it's pretty simple. Poor water safety in New Zealand has contributed to the deaths of people. We don't want to see it happen again. We just can't presume, though, that everything's going to be all right. And I know I've been an elected member, same as you folk mostly are. You just don't want that to happen on your watch. So how do you avoid that? 4 basic barriers need to be, or 4 basic things need to occur to get you right. The first is you've got to have your source water protected right. Firstly, the better quality source water you have, the cheaper it's going to be, both in operating expense and capital expense for you to treat it. So looking after getting a good source water and then looking after it is crucial. Harking back to Havelock North, it was fecal matter getting into the source water through a bore head that wasn't properly sealed that led to that tragedy. Secondly is filtration. Filtration's needed. Firstly, it does get rid of some pathogens, but not all. And secondly, really importantly, it cleans the water enough, particularly in surface water takes. You know all about what happens when it rains in Bulla. Mud gets into the water, it gets turbid, and then the disinfection won't work, the next stage, which is generally chlorination, which has been used for over 100 years to treat water, and or UV treatment, which is a decade or so old it's been used. And that won't work. Neither of them will work if the water's turbid. And then you need secure distribution, so your pipe network needs to be secure. It's one of your biggest risks. It's under the ground. You can't see what's happening with it. And really importantly, if you've got water leaking out, well, A, it's costing you money. You're pouring treated water into the ground. And B, when you have a pressure drop, and that can be as simple as the fire brigade turning the big hose on, that can allow dirt or whatnot into the water supply. That's why we insist in council supplies on the water having what's called residual chlorination in it, meaning that from the water treatment plant to the last house in centralised treatment, there's enough chlorine in it to kill any bugs that may get in, not just the bugs that were in there when it first came out the ground. So we talk about multi-barrier protection, and you've probably seen the Swiss cheese model before, where sometimes the holes can all line up, and you don't want that to happen. What we're talking about with water treatment, I've mentioned chlorine. Chlorine will deal with bacteria such as E. coli. It will deal with viruses such as norovirus, but it won't deal with protozoa, which are another type of pathogen. Chlorine doesn't affect it. They're tough little beggars. They won't be bothered with it, and they cause things such as giardia, or cryptosporidium is another one that can make people very unwell, and probably was what caused an outbreak in Queenstown last year. So by having barriers that are going to control all three of those types of pathogens, you're going to wind up with safe water at the end of it. Um, you're going to have, and I had this when I was mayor and when I was an elected member before that, because I was on community board for 2 terms as well. You're going to have people come to you, I'm sure, and say, there's nothing wrong with our water. And in a fantastic place like Bulla, again, probably you can drink out of a stream most of the time. But the thing is this, people will say to you, as they said to me, they need to lower the standards. These standards are ridiculous. Well, when you're talking about bacteria or you're talking about a protozoa or a virus, frankly, the maximum number that you want to have is zero. Because if you have one, then you have many. And when you put it in the lovely breeding environment of somebody's insides, it's going to become many, many and make them sick very quick in many cases. So you can't, what I'm saying, if people say, if you want to respond to them about lowering the standards, you can't make the numbers lower because zero has to be the number. So then the question is, if you're going to remove any standards, is it the bacteria you want to let through? Is it the norovirus you want to let through? Or is it the cryptosporidium or the giardia? Because that's why you need the different barriers. The only way around this is to say, well, we'll run the risk of having protozoas get through. You don't want that. Nobody wants that. You don't want people getting sick. Economically, it's a very bad idea for people to get sick. Havelock North was estimated to have cost the economy $21 million. It's just even taking the health and the well-being of your people out, which you never would. Financially, it's a very bad idea too. So what can suppliers expect from the Water Services Authority? This is the pyramid or the triangle of needs. Voluntary down the bottom, this is where most council supplies are, where voluntary compliance, doing the right thing, everything's going well, there'll be minimum intervention, we'll give feedback if issues emerge. Then we gradually move up to where people are trying to do the right thing, but it's not really working out, so there might be a bit more targeting there, all the way up to the top where we've got the enforced, where we really have to get the big stick out, so to speak. And we're not prone to getting the big stick out. We haven't done it very often, but you're probably aware that last week in the far north, we did have to get the big stick out. And as councillors, this is something that you need to have in your mind. And coming from Central Otago, I always had in my mind what happened with all our many private supplies that run the irrigation schemes down there. If you're not familiar with the Kaio situation, there's a private supply that for the last 10 years, the people in the township were having to boil their water, a 10-year boil water notice. Then actually things got worse than that because the supply turned off totally, so you couldn't shower and so forth. The Far North District Council had been working for a long time with that supplier. We then worked with the Far North District Council till it got to the point last week where we had to say, listen, for the sake of the people of Kaio, you're going to have to take it over. That's not a good outcome for anybody. It really isn't. And the thing I would suggest to you as elected members is you don't want your private supplies to go that way within your district. And the best way to avoid that happening is to just, for the staff to be, you've got the experts in water treatment working for you. So make sure that they're aware of those schemes and that you're aware of any risks. The benefit of being the community people that you will be is you'll know of schemes that may be starting to have some issues. So get into it yourselves before there needs to be. We're here to help with that though. And that's the second thing I really want folk to take away from this. One is you can't necessarily trust that the water's going to be safe. And two is that particularly with these smaller schemes, we're here to help. I mentioned earlier that if you're over 25 people, you've got to be compliant by November 2025. We want to help with that. So we've introduced our community suppliers team. It's a small team at the moment, but 3 mighty people, and they're here to help those smaller suppliers get across the line. We've also revamped our website. Frankly, before it was fairly impenetrable, but over the last couple of months, we've plain English the heck out of it and made it easier to understand. So reach out is what I'm saying, or encourage as counsellors, if you're talking to somebody on a supplier that's having some challenges, they might think, oh God, I don't want to get Wellington involved. That's the last blooming thing I want. Well, actually, like I say, we're here to help them, not hurt them. What are we expecting from council supplies? Look, you're going to be fully compliant with the rules or the acceptable solutions. If you're not sure what acceptable solutions are, I'm going to come to that shortly. Fully comply with the standards, respond promptly to safety risks with appropriate action. So if your water's getting turbid, you're going to put a boil water notice in place if your plant can't keep up. Maintain robust risk management plans and demonstrate progress towards resilience, because our aim is by 2028, all council supplies should be resilient. So not as many, if any, disruptions such as those boil water supplies. So as governors, you want to be asking yourself, how am I going to know that all those things are happening? What are the reports that are coming to me from the team that let me know and give me surety that we're on the right track for that? Also, keeping in mind, of course, that you're going to be going into a CCO in 2027, I think, for your organisation. You still want to have a finger on the pulse of these things. Just touching on the drinking quality assurance rules, this is the rule book for running the big centralised supplies that councils generally do. There's been some tweaks suggested for that. I'm sure your staff will be over it. Open for consultation until near Christmas. Feel free to reach out if you want to know more info. And I said I was going to talk about acceptable solutions. These are ways of getting compliant without going through the drinking water quality assurance rules, creating a drinking water safety plan. Often used for small supplies. One of those would be mixed use rural, where most of the water goes into a cow shed or on the ground, or in the Central Otago case, onto the fruit trees. Often they've had houses tacked onto them over the years, and eventually sometimes subdivisions. We've got 2 other types of acceptable solutions there. They just make it easier, and they rely on endpoint treatment. So in each house there'll be a UV treatment with filtration before it, rather than centralised treatment coming from you guys. I could talk about this stuff all day because I'm a country boy myself, but I'm conscious that we've got a half an hour and I want to have plenty of time for questions. All I'll say is we've made some changes to them so that lower cost treatment is available for households, getting that per household cost down from around the 10,000 plus mark earlier in the year to sort of 1,500 to 2,500. So really significant lowering of cost. Clearer responsibilities for suppliers and property owners. We've allowed surface water for all 3 acceptable solutions. And as I say, our website's been upgraded with practical how-to resources. I was hoping today to be able to talk about the National Wastewater Standards. There's going to be a government announcement on that later this week. So because it's still in front of the House, all I can say is watch this space. It is coming very soon. And very quickly, because I did want to leave half the time for questions and I've already gone over, these are our reports. The first 2 on the left, really good for elected members to keep tabs on how your team are going, how your council's performing, but also into the future, how your CCO is performing. One's on the drinking water, obviously, and the other's on the environmental impact of drinking water and wastewater treatment plants. They come out every year around the middle of the year. I've always been a water nerd, or ever since I was an elected member, so I love reading these. And next year, there's going to be a greater use of league tables. And finally, that compliance and enforcement strategy, that's what basically I've been talking about for the last 16 minutes. So I'm a wee bit over time. So I'd love to hand back to you, Mayor Chris, and take any questions from you and your team. Oh, before I do that, Rachel, was there anything you'd like to add, or I hope not correct?
No, all good. Thanks.
Phew. Thanks, Rachel. Okay, team, fire away.
Councillor Rutherford.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Tim, Phil Rutherford, councillor. Look, one thing I perhaps could have done a little bit more research myself, but you'll be able to inform me. So once, responsibility is handed over to the newly formed CCO, what is our role in insurance compliance after that point?
Yeah, look, that is really more a question for the DIA than for Taumata Arowai, but I'll go slightly out of my lane and say that you're going to be the governors of the owner. So you'll have a board that makes the decisions that you're currently making at the moment, but you're going to be really busy, I would imagine, organising your statement of expectations, and then from there the hiring and so forth. But I think that may be one that's going to be better taken up with your DIA partnership director than with us, because that's firmly in their lane. They manage local water done well. But you're not out of this totally. That's for sure.
Thank you.
Effectively, the role going forward from a governance point of view, you need to satisfy yourself that the entity is doing everything it is required to do. So that starts, as Tim said, with a statement of expectation, but then also analysing the reporting as it comes through to ensure that they're actually delivering against those standards. And your mechanism through that is the board of directors that you appoint to run that business. So they are immediately liable as directors, and then report through to you and become liable. And you need to convince yourself that they are doing a good enough job with that.
Thank you.
Sorry, I've just lost sound.
Sorry, just on the individual water supplies.
Yep.
So we have water tanks, they will have to have UV filters. And then is there a requirement around that water to be tested on a regular basis, and whose job will it be to monitor that?
Great question. So with individual water tanks, if they're supplying less than 25 people, then they can just look after themselves, although we've got information on the website to help them look after themselves better. If there's a larger water tank scenario and that is supplying, I guess, workers' accommodation or hotel accommodation, I'm not sure what it would be, but if it's got 25 or more people, then yeah, they do need to have that treatment in place. Now, if they're the water supplier themselves, then it's up to them to get the water treatment in place. But if it's say for instance a council scheme or part of a larger scheme, and I take myself back to the mixed use rural scheme where an irrigation scheme is actually supplying 20 houses along the way, the owners of that irrigation scheme can go one of two paths. They can say, we're going to do it and we'll put the UV unit in and we'll charge it, as we charge for the water along the way. Or they can require the property owner to do it themselves and say, right, we're requiring you to do it. We're requiring you to undertake the maintenance. We will remind you, and the owner is required. Sorry, the owner of the scheme is required to remind the owner of the house to change the lamp in the UV plant, change the filters, and as you say, to test the water. So you can either, if it was a council scheme, if you had a small town and you were going to use an acceptable solution and put them on it, you wouldn't be using rainwater, I wouldn't think, but you would be getting them either doing the testing and the maintenance and the installation yourself through your team, or getting the property owners to do it. I hope that was clear enough.
Yeah, it is. Can I just find that interesting, having worked in a water testing place where some of the biggest E. coli counts we got off were off rainwater that had gone into water tanks. And those people, that what we found was they form an immunity to the E. coli, but when visitors use their water, that's when it triggered warnings for them.
Yeah, look, 100% right. And we hear that time and again that there's nothing wrong with my water, but my visitors get sick quite often. And so we do encourage people who are just looking after their own house with their own rainwater tank to have first flush diverters so that you get the dirt off the roof before it gets to the filters, and then to have their own UV unit, their own endpoint treatment unit, because it carries risk. There's no doubt about it. You get birds droppings on the roof and it comes through. Yeah, you've got to have that treatment in place. So we encourage it, but if it's under 25 people, we can't enforce it once enforcement comes into place.
I've just got one more question, because
Sure.
where we have like Airbnbs and commercial accommodation where they don't serve 25 people, but actually they're charging for accommodation and services, is there any obligation around commercial operations like that to have UV filtering or anything?
Gee, Rachel, I'm going to ask you if you can come in with that one because I think I know the answer, but I'd hate to get it wrong.
Yeah. So those type of supplies you describe are still captured under the Water Services Act. They are a drinking water supplier, and so the rules and or acceptable solution will apply to them.
Yeah. Thank you. Thought that was the case. And also, importantly, they are not eligible to use the cheaper types of UV units that can be used in the homes. They're on that still sort of $10,000 plus because you need far more safety devices in place if the UV isn't operating properly for a number of reasons.
Councillor Hawes.
Yeah, I know you haven't really touched on what probably is the elephant in the room for large, probably not quite so much for the Buller district, but nitrate infiltration. And obviously everything you described doesn't actually deal with nitrate infiltration. And also what level of testing are you guys doing on an ongoing basis to try and identify increasing risk?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a topic that certainly is vexing a lot of people in the community and is something that we're keeping an eye on here. So the first thing, the level of nitrate in water, what's called a MAV, the maximum acceptable value. We take guidance essentially from the World Health Organization on that. That's the level that has been deemed. And look, that's where it sits at the moment. I know a lot of organizations say that it's not, it's way too high and it should be lower. Where are we going to take advice from on it? It is what it is at this stage. In terms of monitoring nitrate, a couple of things. Firstly, it is one of our MAVs. It is one of the things that is tested when people regularly test their water. So your team will be doing regular tests that go to labs, and we do get indications of when we had problems. So when I said that there were notifications last week, and 15 were for E. coli, I think there was 32 notifications. So half of them were E. coli, the other was various maximum acceptable values that were blown. So I think arsenic in one plant naturally occurring. So yep, that's how the nitrates are monitored. When it comes to the groundwater monitoring, where is this going to become a risk? That's on the regional councils, although in an hour and 20 minutes, who knows what that's going to be, because there is some form of an announcement coming. I'm sure you're all aware of that, but it's not something that we're not cognizant of. Yeah. It's gone quiet again.
Oh, I'm not used to pressing the button yet. Thanks, Tim and Rachel. That's been very, very helpful. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, Mayor Chris and CE Simon. Really appreciate the opportunity. And look, at any stage, if anybody needs any help, I'm pretty easy to find. Rachel and her team are always very approachable. And as I said at the outset, we're here to help. So love to hear from any of you, and look, all the very best for the triennium ahead. I got out. 13 years was enough for me. So well done, all of you still being in. Thanks for your time.
Thanks a lot.